So a little bit of history, actually, how ONAP has started 1.5 years ago. That started from Amsterdam release. That started basically from the merge of what we called back then Open eComp. eComp is a code delivered by AT&T, and OpenO project, which was already running for a year, I think, where initially 8 AT&T projects were merged with 3 OpenO projects. And then we thought, okay, so this is a huge code. How are we going to test it? How are we going to make sure that the first release works? So what we did, we actually decided what would be the use cases to implement on that merged platform, so we can prove that this is a single project actually, and those modules can work together, because use cases would use modules from the both code bases, and the code base would work. So we decided that the most important use cases back then were, for the very first release, were residential VCP, actually led by Amdocs back then, Vivolte, led by China Mobile, and Virtual Firewall, Virtual DNS, mostly for backward compatibility, led by AT&T. That was Amsterdam. And Amsterdam, again, the goal was to build one modular platform. At this point of time, when we finished Amsterdam, then we started the global participation of subscribers were about 34%. This is how Linux Foundation count. They basically count all of the service providers which participate in the project, and how much coverage they provide to the subscriber, how much subscribers all over the world they serve. So then we started, it was around 34%. When we finished Amsterdam, it was already at 60%. I just can say that then we finished Beijing, it was more than 65. I think that now with Deutsche Telekom joining the board, it is around 70%. Now, when we finished Amsterdam successfully, the second goal was, okay, we have a merge platform. We have even some of the use cases running, but what really is the quality of the platform we provide, because initial goal is deployment by several service providers. By the way, at AT&T, it was in production ever since, even before actually ONAP has started with eComp. But, looking also forward to other service provider deployments, clearly we need to improve quality. So that became the major goal of Beijing, to become deployment ready and basically invest more on the non-functional requirements side, on platform quality, less perhaps on enhancing on functional requirements base. In Casablanca, this is now ongoing release, which we're about to finish in November this year. I will talk more about it, hopefully, if time allows. And we are proceeding with the mix of both, enhancing of non-functional requirements or platform quality, both with enriching platform with new functional requirements. So let's move to the next one. So for Beijing, actually, now a little bit of overview for Beijing. We defined several categories for non-functional requirements for the platform quality, which are resilience, usability, security, manageability, stability, scalability, and performance. A little bit going forward, I can tell you that fortunately or unfortunately, we have 2 of those categories proceeding well, which has scalability and resilience. The rest one proceeding not as much as we would want to. They all have their, for each one of those categories, we basically defined for each one of the projects in ONAP. Back then, we had 30 projects. Right now, I think we have 32 projects. We defined what would be KPIs and what is the necessary move for each one of the projects to achieve in the release. For instance, in Beijing, we define for SO what 0 means, what 1 means, what 2 means, and what would be necessary to move on from 0 to 1, for example, in Beijing release, and what it would mean for that specific SO project, and this is what we did for all of the projects. So as you can imagine, that was a huge effort actually. And so on the functional requirements front in Beijing, we could only achieve some partial implementation of change management, some foundations of the change management, not fully completed, some foundation of hardware platform awareness, and actually manual scaling out and partial implementation of scaling in functionality as well. So Beijing, the emphasis was paid fully, as you see, to enriching the platform with the quality features. Here, one slide, I guess we've already seen this slide today on the architecture, but the important thing to add here, perhaps, all of you know, it's combined of design and write-on modules. The important thing, perhaps, here to add is that, this is a single architecture right now, because many, many people still ask, okay, but there are OpenO modules, there are ecomp modules. I don't think that we in ONAP community see it like that any longer. This is just one single architecture, including everything. And when we discuss, about a new project or new modules we want to create, we don't have those discussions practically from the beginning of where it belongs, where it would be connected, speaking of ecomp or OpenO, whatever makes sense from the architecture perspective. So this is where it stands right now. And also there are some peripherals, those modules connecting or functional, additional functionalities connected with ONAP externally. As was mentioned before as well, northbound interoperability using existing standards. Now the foundation of ONAP operation management with Kubernetes, placement optimization policy, and harmonization of industry model, what Huideng was covering before on all of the discussion which are ongoing on how we build model in ONAP and how we proceed with all the standards which currently cover that. Now speaking again on ONAP deployability, I have here a little bit more information about each one of those categories and what was achieved actually in Beijing release for each one of them. By the way, you will get a presentation. I uploaded the presentation, so you will get it from the layer 1, 2, 3 site. And actually, I partially use even the slides that Linux Foundation provided me with to make sure that the information, is fully correct and double-checked and so on. But you will get on this information. So as you can see, and as I mentioned before, so on the resiliency front, we definitely achieved huge progress. Performance, not that much. Security, we did quite a few things. There is a vulnerability also, there is a vulnerability mitigation, there is a vulnerability subcommittee actually in under security subcommittee, which is doing a great job, I believe. Scalability, also lots of work was done, and also on multi-vim side, lots of work was done there. With regard to Beijing functional requirements, as I said, we unfortunately had only few. On change management, execute in place upgrade workflow for the virtual gateway. We tested those. It is important to mention that in Beijing release, we did not have any new use cases. We tested the new functional requirements on the existing use cases coming from Amsterdam release. Then hardware platform awareness, some foundations was achieved, and manual scaling out. This is something that we tested actually on Volte and also on virtual firewall, I believe, because we had actually two versions. One of them also included manual scaling in. In this release, in Casablanca release, we are going forward with this feature. We are doing automatic scaling out. In the next release, I think scaling in is planned, so this feature definitely progressed. There is a lot of demand to support scaling in ONAP from different service providers. Now for Casablanca release, after dedicating half a year to enhancing the platform, and from one side, and from the other side, knowing that eventually service providers want to get both quality and new use cases, we decided to go for both. And we developed some level of balance between both in terms of supporting some of non-functional requirements, enhancing, platform, enhancing what we called also deployability in terms of all those parameters that we've seen before, resiliency, scalability, security, so on, but also introducing new use cases. So those use cases, as I said, continuation of scaling out, continuation of change management. We do CCVPN use case run by Huawei with China Mobile and Vodafone, which combines OTN with enterprise VCP. One of the very important things that we actually started to discuss even in Beijing, we thought we would start in Casablanca. We partially started in Casablanca. We do have PNF support in Casablanca. And some people ask, but why PNF support really is important for 5G? It may even sound funny. Then we advance with VNF, and all of a sudden, PNF becomes a mandatory feature for 5G. But actually, PNF support is needed because DU, distributed unit of radio, of majority of the vendors will remain PNF. So this is something that we started to think about in Beijing. Could not complete this, moved it to Casablanca. To Casablanca, the major part of PNF support functionality will be accomplished. There is edge automation that triggers a lot of discussions in Casablanca, and we started to do some features related to edge automation, mostly related to what we call real-time or near real-time applications, which require also near real-time or real-time functionality of a different module, ONAP modules such as analytic gatherings, policy, and so on, because in some cases you may need a real-time behavior even from ONAP system in order to support some of the use cases. For 5G, we have lots of discussions related to network slicing, and that attracts lots of attention. And the only reason we did not start implementation in Casablanca is because 3GPP standard was not completed back then. Back then we started Casablanca, but we definitely plan to start it now in Dublin, which we are about to start at the end of November this year. And I can tell also that those use cases on 5G and H trackers a lot of attention. 2 weeks ago at ONS, again, we had a presentation on that, and the room was fully packed with people asking lots of questions. So, service providers do want platform quality, but eventually, as I said, all those new use cases which may trigger them to go for deployment, they're also needed, heavily needed, and so those discussions definitely take a lot of attention, and we handle them in ONAP under use case subcommittee, which I chair. Now, this is a little bit, to talk about participation, because there may be some concerns still that, it is led, and this is what I heard, by 1, 2, 3 company. And, this clearly shows this is not the case. Yes, the major contribution comes from AT&T. It used to be this way, it is still this way, but you can, I think this really proves that we have a diverse community, because, you should not look how it started, that 2 major code bases were brought to ONAP. You should really look how it progresses. You can really see many companies here contributing. And this is not just, just some empty words. This is a real statistic taken of code contribution. So this really shows how many companies and what companies, by the way, also contribute to ONAP. So here I have a comparison between the time frame when ONAP started and Q2 2018, and I have even one more, a little bit more updated. So one is from the end of the last year, and the second one is from, I think, only recently was taken, Q3 2018. I think sometimes in September it was taken, so you can clearly see distribution and contribution by different companies. You can see companies which contribute. You can see the diversity. I think this is what determines a success of open source community. I think we are definitely there. We have many participating companies, and not just by words or by, paying membership to the Linux Foundation, but by really putting their developers and delivering the code. ONAP deployment updates. Here I have several slides actually provided by Linux Foundation. On AT&T, clearly, AT&T is committed to ONAP, as I said, even before ONAP was established as an open source community. China Mobile, pretty much the same. They have a very wide trial with ONAP. They have actually a new use case such as CCVPN recently brought to ONAP, and this release in Casablanca working jointly with Vodafone. Orange recently in June, then we had a meeting in Beijing, they announced, and 2 weeks ago at ONS, they actually backed their plan on issuing RFP by the end of the year, requesting all of their 5G vendors that was also published by the press release be compliant with ONAP as their next generation network management system. China Telecom also engaged and involved in ONAP ever since its inception. Verizon came about half a year ago, I think, but they already have quite a few developers working on ONAP. For Verizon, it is especially important to support actually some of ETSI standards, and this is one of the areas they pushing the strategy. Bell with Amdocs actually helps Bell to get to ONAP deployment. After AT&T, I think, was the second live deployment on ONAP since Quarter 4 2017, and they're heavily focused on simplified deployment and ONAP operation management contribution. They used to be also a PTL of this project. Now Amdocs leads, but actually this is a joint work has been always between Bell and Amdocs. Vodafone also, they started to be more active, and actually now they even plan to put more developers for the next release on ONAP. Turk Telecom also have some developers and working jointly with Netsia. We will also shortly see Netsia, company which is owned by Turk Telecom, which is heavily involved in ONAP and developing some of the use cases. My own company, Amdocs, and staying here, I'm very proud of the contribution that my company makes to ONAP. It's deep commitment. Ever since, even not an inception, but even before with Ecomp and working jointly on co-creation with AT&T through the whole process, and all of our contributors which are working on the different modules, participate in architecture and use case subcommittee and modeling and all of the activities, and that deep engagement continues. Ericsson, orchestrator and Ericsson network management both incorporate ONAP components. Fujitsu, Huawei, of course, one of the heavy contributors to ONAP. So there are IDOR, design time, IaaS, runtime commercial platforms based on ONAP. And IBM, ONAP on IBM Cloud Private, I think they already demoed it, at least I saw their demo at one of the conferences. InnoCybe, Netsia, as I mentioned, working closely with Turk Telecom, plus several more in Quarter 2, Quarter 3. Now, at the end of life on ONAP service, I guess the process that vendor provided VNF, vendor packaged VNF as per ONAP requirements, and who then briefly mentioned that after the question regarding VNF SDK, SDC, and all those tools provided. Then design time, design test team on board VNFs, designers create product services recipes. Then runtime comes, of course, OSS, BSS system trigger service deployment, service lifecycle management, and then in closed loop with constant data collection, analytics, event monitoring, and what we call S3P, which is about platform quality. This is also was briefly touched by Huidenk. The only thing I would like to mention, this is about interworking with a different standard body. There is also a question I've been asked several times even this week. Is there any conflict? So in my view, there can't be a conflict between work done by standards and work done in ONAP. So basically, in ONAP, this is an easier way to adopt standards quicker. This is how I see this. So basically, if this is something, if some particular standard is indeed demanded by industry, because we know, those have an experience in standards, we know that unfortunately there are some standards which are produced but nobody used them. So open source is the place where a service provider can actually come the demand, okay guys, we need it. And then it is a collaborated effort to deliver those. So basically the adoption is much quicker, much faster, and so I see only a potential cooperation here. I don't see any conflict between those two, and this is indeed what happens in ONAP. What I probably would like to say, I think the time has ended, but what I have several more slides, basically almost over, on 5G and edge automation. We can go through them. We can stop here. What I want to mention here is that, as I said, 5G use cases and edge automation use cases are extremely important, and this is where many discussions are held in ONAP. And the only thing is that, we need to find the right balance indeed, and we keep struggling with that, between enhancing platform quality, because there are different opinions. There are some again who say that functional base is fine, but please extend the quality, improve the quality, and there are others who say, but we need ONAP for 5G and edge automation, so please bring us those particular use cases of functional requirements. So the trigger point here is balance, but no doubt that this would become the basis for the major ONAP deployments in the coming years. The demand for 5G and edge automation and bringing a new network management, which is ONAP, to those systems. So this is definitely where, where I see the emphasis on in the next releases to come. And as I have to finish, probably one thing more to say. We are triggered, we are live community. We are triggered by requests, we are triggered by demand of the service provider, we are triggered by resources. So if you want to see ONAP going in one certain direction, please come and contribute, please participate in our meeting. I keep approaching service providers, being a use case subcommittee chair, asking them to bring their requirements, to tell them vocally what requirements are, so we know what we develop, so the system that we develop is aligned with what they need to deploy. This is a key. So being a vendor or being a service provider, please hear your voice. Please come and contribute. Please let us know what you want. Even if you are not a member of ONAP, it is extremely important to know where industry should be heading, where your requirements are, and what we should be implementing. Because we have too many, we need to decide what to implement, and if we hear several companies speaking in the same direction, it would be much easier for us to define actually what is really needed. And I'll be happy, to answer all of your questions after that, both specific questions on the use cases that we are discussing and general questions on ONAP. Thank you very much. Okay. So are there any questions?
I have one if nobody else does.
Okay.
In the cases, let's say telecom or Bell that you were mentioning, are those cases where the operators are taking the code themselves, or are they being helped?
So I don't think it is realistic to assume that any service provider except AT&T perhaps, with a huge effort they put on this and many people working actually on this, is capable of doing it itself. And this is indeed a big question behind open source such an ONAP, because there is some wrong impression that open source is something which can be taken in deployment. Open source is a huge piece of code. It is a platform perhaps for deployment, but it is not something ready for production. So it is up to the vendor to actually take that and what is called, in open source community, provide a distribution. So it is still required, vendor is still required there. What service provider can do jointly with vendor in open source and in ONAP in particular, and this is something what we are trying to achieve all the time, is to bring the requirements on time, so whatever we produce is aligned with their requirements, both for quality and for functional enrichment. This is something which is needed. But then eventually a service provider would need vendor in order to support it with deployment, and this is actually what is happening already today. As I've mentioned, Bell, we are working. In fact, my company is working with Bell, and that was published, and we are providing them with ONAP deployment.